Welcome to Switch Theory. My name is Chris Amundsen. I'm your co-host, along with my other co-host and better half, Mr. Larry Golden. And Larro, we are here, and we're just, I know a lot of times we kind of talk about our week and see how things are going. But I think we're going to dispense with the pleasantries here and introduce our guest, because this is a guest that, Larry, I know you and I have been waiting to have on our show for a long, long time. He is the gold standard of journalism, sports journalism in the Chicago area. Yeah, he previously wrote for the Chicago Tribune for many years, and now he's a movie star, a TV star with NBC Sports Chicago, and always humble and always willing to pour a cold bucket on any trade rumors that I'm interested in. So, Casey Johnson, welcome to the show. Thank you so much for being here. How are you doing? How's January treating you in 2024?
Pretty first day of winter here in Chicago, so it's a little sloppy and miserable, but we're used to that. And thank you for having me. I know we've been trying to connect for a while. It's cool that it finally worked out, and I appreciate those that know me as the cold bucket guy, because I know I don't pay a lot of attention to the comments on Twitter, but I have seen that enough over the years to know I've proudly earned that reputation. And I always say, is it cold water or is it factual?
That's right. Yeah, you got to pour water on the hot takes and bring some reality through. So yeah, no, it's an absolute pleasure. I know Larro can echo those sentiments.
Yeah, no, I mean, I talked to KC before we started, and this is just awesome. There's so many questions I want to ask, but I know we got to kind of shrink it down to our usual episode. So this is just a really cool opportunity to talk to someone that is, has been around this organization for a while, and also, now around this team day to day, as close as possible to the team as anyone can be that is not paid by the Reinsdorfs. So
that we know of.
Oh no, exactly.
That we know.
Exactly. So yeah, I'm excited, Chris. Man, I'm excited.
We're going to be doing something a little bit different today than our normal kind of spiel. We've been wanting to do kind of a true-false series of questions called Bull or No Bull. It's Chicago Bulls themed, and so essentially, Casey, we're going to be asking you or making statements or asking questions, and you can respond with Bull, meaning it's false or it's not true or it's overstated, or No Bull, meaning it's true. So I know those are kind of opposite your mind. So we're gonna have to have you be on your toes today. And then obviously, if you want to expound on that answer, we'd love to hear your insights about these different topics. And obviously, if there's something else you want to discuss, we're happy to talk anything about Bulls and or your favorite bands or whatever the topic comes into, play here. So. I know with the Bulls are in a precarious situation this year. Their record is very similar to last year in a lot of ways. They're kind of just chugging along under 500, having some weeks where you think the Bulls are just going to be the worst team this year and everything needs to be blown up. And then other weeks where they go on these stretches where you're like, hey, this is competent basketball. This is what I want to watch. This is all I want from a season is, this excitement, this thrill. But the main point of emphasis this season has clearly been the storyline surrounding Zach LaVine and his position on the team. And so the first statement here is just Zach LaVine will be a Bull after the trade deadline.
Man, you start with the tough ones.
Just right out.
Will be a Bull after the trade deadline. It's really close because I would say that, this I'm expounding before I answer. It's pretty well documented. Both sides are motivated to try to make something work elsewhere. But I'm going to go no Bull. I just, it's also been well documented and reported that there hasn't been much of a market for him to this point. And obviously, a lot can change over the next month. We all know that. And the logical landing spot is the Lakers. And unless they move off their current stance of not including Austin Reeves, I don't see how a deal gets done. Now, maybe things get desperate enough there that they change that stance. But there's also been plenty of reporting that they don't want to add a long-term deal and, hamstring their situation moving forward. He would be a perfect fit there. I think we all can agree on that. I mean, man, him alongside LeBron and AD, that would quickly, to me, shed his reputation of being a non-winning player. Because I think if you put him in the right situation, Zach can clearly impact winning. You saw that with the Olympic team. So I think he'd be an absolute perfect fit there. I just don't see them finding common ground, but a lot, I'm answering these questions as of January 9th. I mean, if we were taping this on February 5th, it might be a different answer, but January 9th, I'm going to say no Bull. I think he will be here past the deadline.
Yeah, I mean, Kris, you start off with it. That's a hot one right there.
It's one that's on everyone's minds. It's been the Zach LaVine storyline this whole season.
Yeah, I mean, my goodness, man, that's a good one right out the gate. But I think KC, I just want to start off with something a little bit more lighthearted, but I was at work and I was thinking about this, and when it comes to the coaches that you've covered for the Chicago Bulls, would you say that Billy has been one of the more controversial coaches? I don't know if controversial is the right coach. Right word. But would you say that he's a coach that has been? I'm trying to think of how I want to word this bull no bull question. He's been more of a coach that is, some fans have really loved. Some fans really think that he can't coach. He's just a defensive guy. He's too much of a player's coach. He doesn't really lay the wood down when he should. And I think if you compare, I want to get your expertise on how you would compare him to the Tibbses, the Tim Floyds, the Fred Hoibergs. So I guess controversial would be the right word. I'm thinking
polarizing.
Polarizing. There we go. My gosh, man.
Trust the journalist too.
I am a writer occasionally. So
but yeah, would you say he's the most polarizing coach the Bulls have had in your tenure?
I would say Bull to that. I don't think he's the most polarizing. I am aware of the dynamic. I really do. I'm not just saying this. I really do have gotten pretty good at not reading the comments. So I don't know everything that is said about him, but I have seen enough to know that there is, like you said, there's some fan base that think, he's in over his head or kowtows the players too much. I'll just say this, if you talk, he loves talking basketball. And when you talk basketball to the guy, man, he goes granular. He goes deep. He loves X's and O's. He knows ball. You can't achieve what he's achieved at both levels, really. Yeah. He's going to go into the Hall of Fame one day because that's the basketball Hall of Fame. So just from his college career alone, he's in. He's going to be in Springfield one day. And he's achieved at a high level in the NBA. I mean, you can say he's maybe underachieved commensurate to his talent level. That might be a fair debate, but he's a wonderful steward for your franchise, great face of your franchise, really good communicator. One of the most consistent personalities I've ever been around. He is always the same, day in, day out with us, with his players. And that's one thing players like about him. So I guess if you wanted to say Bull or no Bull, is he a good coach? I'm going to say, is he a bad coach? I'm going to say Bull. I mean, he's a good coach. You can get into the conversation if he's elite, top 5, all that stuff. That's fair. But he's a very, very good coach, and on all the levels that I mentioned.
I think that's fair, Larro. And with Coach Donovan, you can tell just watching the press conferences. I'm sure, obviously, you're in them, and the quotes that we get from him. He loves basketball, and that's scratching his itch. It sounds like every time I ask him a question about a play or a breakdown or something, I love how he does that. And we've had coaches in the past, like Tom Thibodeau, for example, was also a really, really good coach, very, very well respected, obviously still coaching today. But he'd give you these answers like, we got more than enough, or just kind of these cliches. And it's so refreshing. Or, with Boylan, for example, very, very different. Just the responses. He had lots of cliches, lots of different metaphors for things. But Billy just seems to love talking about basketball. And I do agree. I think that the level of competence from the coach has never been in question. You can argue if he's the tip top, but he's always been just as consistency level that a lot of the other Bulls players and the Bulls team itself has not had. And so he's kind of been the consistent force throughout his tenure so far. And it's been really interesting to see. And kind of jumping back to Zach LaVine real quick, you had documented pretty widely about how many coaches Zach LaVine had in his first 6 or 7 years. He's had 6 coaches in 7 years. And so to have this coach, Billy Donovan, for the last few years has been really nice to see. Of just kind of have that consistency, what to expect. And also with Zach, you mentioned something about this label of being a winning player or not. And I think the pendulum has really swung on Zach this season. I think a lot of people have viewed him as obviously a really gifted athlete, a high level, 3-level scorer, and someone whose defense, while it leaves something to be desired, oftentimes it's clearly worked within the scheme. DeMar DeRozan and Vucevic played an ungodly amount of minutes together last season, and they were 5th in defense. And you've seen him in the last few games since his return. On ball, he can be a really quality defender if he's engaged, but the engaged part has always been that factor. And so you mentioned the winning player thing and the fits. Zach LaVine and a lot of other players on this team, it seems like, are really fit dependent. And that's one of the reasons why the quote unquote big three of this team hasn't really worked out so much. It's because all these players can thrive in the right role, but not sure if the right role is together. And so clearly there's been this, these rumors the last 6 months to a year about moving Zach LaVine. And to me, it didn't make a lot of sense in the beginning. It's like, why would you trade what I thought was their best, or at least most promising, most palatable in any kind of lineup player? Why would you have him be the one that you're trying to move? But it seems like the Bulls have a vision of what they want to do, and it doesn't include Zach LaVine, and it may include DeMar DeRozan and Nikola Vucevic. So the next question I have is will DeMar be re-signed in the offseason, or will he be traded or just walk as a free agent?
Man, these are the hard ones. A lot of hard ones. But I'll do the expounding before I answer again. But to your point, I mean, I think that was so well said about being fit dependent, because, I mean, we all know this, but like all 3 of those guys individually, you look at their stat lines last season, they all had unbelievable seasons. Yeah. All 3 of them, they were all healthy, and they had the 24th ranked offense. It's almost astonishing still that happened to me, because you look at Vucevic's stats individually, Zach's stats individually, DeMar's stats individually. You're like, wow, that dude had balled out. He had a good year. And it's just we've seen enough of those 3 together to, as the fandom has been clamoring for, just to, expect change at some point. And I'm with you. I think it's pretty well documented. I mean, I used to be way more objective when I was at the Chicago Tribune than I am in my current role, because I'm in a little bit different role now. And I think it's pretty well documented. I'm a pretty big Zach defender. And I was like you. I was like, this is the most modern NBA player you have, and you're going to trade that dude instead of DeMar or Vooch? What's up with that? But it's been hard to defend Zach this year. He has clearly regressed, and at least in that first stint before he's coming back from this injury, I like what I've seen in these last 2 games by and large. I mean, obviously he's rusty, but his engagement level defensively, the fact that they're placing him in more catch and shoot situations, so he's not so dribble dependent and decision-making dependent. But until that injury, man, he was just not having a good season. And he would be I'm not speaking out of turn. I mean, I talked to him about it. He's answered questions about it. So I was with you. I was like, until this season, I was like, why would you trade that guy? And, it's clear that the organization internally values DeMar more, whether that's for, it's as much for off the court stuff from my perspective as it is on the court stuff. And they just like his, consistency and his low maintenance, and, just how much he can be relied on many, many levels. I mean, he's very much like Billy in that he is consistent, same dude every day, incredibly humble, all about the team. So that's a long-winded intro to Bull or No Bull. And I can't remember if it was he will be on the team or.
Yeah, they will re-sign him this offseason.
I'm going to go with No Bull. Again, I think it could be wrong. It could change, but I'd be stunned if he's traded before February. I mean, I think you obviously have an idea of what he's planning to do this offseason, but with them owning his bird rights, like they kind of are in the driver's seat in his unrestricted free agency, because I don't see a lot of teams going heavy money wise to sign him. So I think he'll be back on the Bulls next season.
It's funny you mentioned that, because I think the same situation was true when DeMar was signed the first time. Is the Bulls seem to be willing to give him a lot more than any other place, and I'm not sure if that's true. There's always rumors that who could have created cap space or made that trade or something, but at the time it seemed like the mid-level exception or below was his market. And once again, we see coming up, we're re-signing 30-plus-year-old players. I'm 36. I feel like I can play a lot, but like I don't have thousands of NBA minutes on me, or any zero NBA minutes actually. But it's it seems like a strategy where like what are we doing? Like where are we going? And is it just is it just this mentorship factor? Is it just a base level of competency that they want as an organization with Vooch and DeMar there? We've seen DeMar have a lot of success, I think, mentoring some of the younger players. I think Patrick Williams stands out as one I know there's been some clips this season of Patrick doing the exact move that DeMar did, like the next play down or different things like that, and kind of adopting, his offseason workout. So I think there's clearly a lot of value to having DeMar DeRozan around. It's just, you have to understand what the team's ultimate goal is. And that hasn't always been clear. And I think that's why there's been kind of this back and forth of, what they're going to do. And I think Vooch being re-signed was probably the first sign that the Bulls plan to continue being in this kind of stratosphere of chasing the 10th seed, if you will. I'm sure they have higher expectations than that, but it has been at points depressing knowing that we're bringing Vooch back. And I love these players. They're great players and they're great personalities, but it's just like it's hard to reconcile that with my desire as a fan to want to see, something more, to have hope for a future that's better than a first round exit or even a play-in exit. So that's been kind of the issue, right? As you've seen this team. And I'm sure you get a lot of questions about that, about like what the team's future is or what their real goal is. And I know Arturas has been pretty straightforward about his goals, and he's so far done what he said. And, I'm interested to see what his goal is this, after this trade deadline, and I kind of see how we'll play his hand. So no question on that one, just me ranting for a minute here. But
no, because I actually think the strategy's been pretty, like you said, pretty clear. I mean, ever since they inherited the rebuild and pushed the eject button on the rebuild with the Vooch trade, it's been all in for relevancy, competitiveness, however you want to brand it. So to me, the strategy's been pretty clear. And I think you really saw it then with the Vooch re-signing last summer, because kind of to your point with the DeMar acquisition, I don't really see a lot of other teams that were going to be giving Vooch that number. So, the DeMar one is a little bit different because they were still early in their bid for relevancy and they almost had to overpay to achieve that. Mm-hmm. But with the Vooch re-signing, they still, clearly favor this bid at competency, relevancy, competitiveness, however you want to describe it. But to your point, we all see a ceiling on this. There's been enough data, I think, that there is a ceiling on this, and that's why it will be interesting to see, what happens with Zach, what happens with DeMar. I mean, Vooch is going to be here, but I've reported that the focus is clearly on Zach right now. They really want to try to resolve the Zach situation and see how the roster shakes down, and then make their next decisions moving forward based on that. And as we said at the top of this episode, there's a real scenario in which Zach's here past February 8th, and then all these decisions get pushed into the offseason.
So, you guys were just talking about the kind of, they didn't really give fans a clear understanding of, like, at points, like if they're going to, look towards the future. And I think, like you said, now you kind of understand, like, they're more so like, look, we're trying to be relevant. We're trying to hopefully maybe a star down the line will want to come here because of us having a little bit of success here, and maybe a star will think, hey, if you add me to that, I can take them over the top kind of deal. But I guess my question to this is, and I know Casey, like, you probably don't dive too far into the Bulls Twitterverse, but like someone like myself, man, like I'm a big believer in, like, giving young guys room to grow, and especially in a situation where there's not really a clear, like, there's not a Giannis or Damian Lillard. There's not like Jason Tatum, Jaylen Brown on the team where you can see, okay, those are the guys. They're going to take us to, perennial deep playoff runs. And so I'm trying to be nice, but like development in your time around this team, in terms of, making sure young guys come into a situation where they have the types of players surrounded by them, can help them grow in terms of veteran leadership. And I know you guys just brought up DeMar, and that's a great point. But also like reps, live game reps, things like that. And then I know they just hired Mr. Patton as well. But my question is to you, the Bull or no Bull, is this the best you've seen in terms of like a development staff for a Bulls team?
I would say Bull, just based on results. I think the commitment is there. I mean, they've certainly it's also a different era. I mean, obviously I've been covering this team a long time, so I'm going to get into what I think has been the best development story in a little bit. And staffs were much smaller back when I refer to the one that I'm going to refer to. But I will say, like, the commitment level has been significant, and it's been genuine, and it's been – so when I say Bull, I don't want to, like, denounce some of the development that they've done, because I think they have developed some. I think it's been hit or miss. Obviously, Io's been a good story. The jury's still out on Patrick a little bit. Kobe, and a lot of its credit also goes to these guys individually, because a lot of these guys now in the offseason go off with their own trainers and put in their own work and things like that. But this organization, this managerial regime has been genuine about their commitment to player development. They've spent a lot of money there. They've hired a lot of people there. And I think they have had some success. You've heard Kobe shout out Peter Patton in press conferences, other things like that. But the best example I saw was 2 decades ago. And again, staffs were so much smaller, but, that run where John Paxson and Gar Forman hit on, Luol Deng, Ben Gordon, Kirk Heinrich. Now, again, a little bit different era, because a lot of guys stayed in school longer back then. Ben was a 3-year player and Kirk was a 4-year player. But Luol came out after 1 year. And the contributions you had, I mean, even from a guy like Andres Nocioni, who was very much a veteran on the international stage, but was an NBA rookie. And, man, that staff got the most out of those players. And that team, I've said this before on other appearances I've made over the years, that 04-05 team was my favorite team I've ever covered, because, first of all, I was a lot younger in my career then. I was a lot closer in age to players than I am now. I was really close with a lot of those players, and that team was just the most unlikely success story, because you had so many young players. And I loved covering Scott Skiles, my favorite coach I've ever covered. That was probably the best example of player development that I've seen in my time covering the Bulls. But again, I don't want to make that seem like they're doing a bad job now. I think this has been kind of mixed results. But the commitment certainly is there. They have spent a lot of money in that department and made a lot of hires. So kudos to them for following through on that, because that's what we heard from this regime when they were hired. And we'll see if they can, keep hitting on some success stories as they move forward here.
When you brought up Scott Skiles' name, it reminded, I don't know why, but it instantly went back to the J.R. Smith whole thing with the headband. And I don't know, man. It's so funny, all the stories you hear.
I think you're talking Ben Wallace with the headband.
Or what was it with JR? What was the thing with JR that
But wasn't JR like a day bull for a day? I don't remember. It's like
there was something that there was like a room. Well, obviously you were around him, so you know more than me. But I can't remember. Maybe it was Ben Wallace, but like I can't remember. It was something with JR. Maybe they just
the headband thing was definitely Ben Wallace, and I've got a great story. I mean, we were in New York for that game, and we used to sit like right on the court, man. Like we were Madison Square Garden, we'd be like right on the baseline. I mean, you could reach out and touch the last guy on the Bulls bench. And, I mean, Scott had and it was the organization's rule too. It was from Jerry Reinsdorf to John Paxson. Scott was just a no headband rule, and Ben and Scott were going through a period where they weren't getting along really well, and Ben walked out and had a headband on, and like, I mean, Scott did not blink. Immediately, boom, up to the scores table. First stoppage, Ben comes out. You know, Ben sat there. Scott would not have anything to do with it, man. He was not talking to him. They sent assistants down there, players down there. They're talking to Ben. Finally, Ben's like, man, I can humping and grumping. And he went back in, checked in, no headband. Comes out to start the second half. He's got a headband on. Scott, I'm out. So right up to the scores table. I mean, it was just like two like iron-willed, stubborn guys. But man, you did not mess with Scott Skiles. I mean, he was a tough SOB as a player and same way as a coach. And, you know, he had his rules. And talk about a guy who did not give a flying you-know-what about what players thought about him. But players respected him because he was just black and white, and he was a great teacher of the game. And he was not really about himself. He was just about like, this is what needs to happen for us to be better. But he was just about as blunt and as matter of fact as it was. He did not spend a lot of time on the player relations thing. And again, different era. I mean, this is 2 decades ago. So, but that's an all-time memory from all my years on the beat. That game in Madison Square Garden.
That's amazing.
That's amazing.
I don't know where I got the J.R. Smith thought from, but
he was on the Bulls.
A great story.
You're like making me. I can't remember every story. I've been doing this too long, but I do think he was on the Bulls for like a day. I think John. I don't know what it was. I think John just was like, "We're not dealing with that guy. I'm just waving him." I think they hired him like an extra salary to trade, and he was gone. Like
that makes sense, though. He was a knucklehead back in those days for sure.
Bulls legend J.R. Smith, right? So
there are a lot of those. Carmelo Anthony, Bulls.
I was gonna say Carmelo Anthony, Bulls legend, finally got him after all those years.
Yeah. Now you got me looking up J.R. Look at what you guys are making me do. You got me looking up J.R. Smith transaction. Look at this. Yeah, he was in the Tyson Chandler trade, July 14th, 2006, and traded 4 days later. So there you go.
4 days.
It's crazy.
That's a great tenure.
Yeah.
It's a great tenure on the Bulls. That's so funny. That kind of, you're talking about the young guys in development, and I wrote an article recently on Swish Theory, which is our platform, and we got a lot of great writers that do things across the league, and kind of talking about the Bulls' habits as an organization and whether or not they lead to winning. And spoiler alert, I don't think that they have so far. But one of the things that I mentioned there was when Mark Eversley and Arturas Karnisovas came on, they talked about the lack of development staff, that there was just kind of the one person there on that staff. And even though the rebuild had started 4 or 5 years earlier with the Jimmy Butler trade, and we had guys, Wendell Carter and Lauri Markkanen and Kobe White and Daniel Gafford and these guys and Chris Dunn, it seems like they really could have used some of the investment that the Bulls have more recently made. And I was actually really impressed when Acme, as we'll call them, came on and they started hiring player development staff and hiring Billy. And Billy just seemed like such a great coach for development, because I remember that first season he was putting Wendell Carter in positions to be kind of a hub passer, which was a skill set that he had some talent for, but not a lot of reps in. And then with Kobe White, he had him be the starting point guard, which, Kobe was much more of kind of like a shooting guard, very like a blur, north to south kind of athlete. And I really liked how he did that, and then had Lauri Markkanen doing a lot more kind of on-ball things and coming off screens than Jim Boylan did. And I was really impressed with that. And I think one of the frustrations I had with that, and you talked about the mixed results with the young guys, is how after 4 months of that, they decided to go in a completely different direction and traded off Wendell Carter and 2 first-round picks, one of whom is Franz Wagner now, and who's looking like a future All-Star. And traded for Vooch, and because Vooch came in, Lauri Markkanen all of a sudden started to be kind of superfluous on that roster, and they ended up trading him for Derek Jones and a first-round pick. But I wonder what we would be seeing if the Bulls had stuck with that strategy, because those young players were developing. They put Patrick Williams out there and just said, soak up minutes, go guard Giannis, go guard LeBron. And now years later, we've seen Lauri Markkanen finally, as you were always kind of a believer in Lauri Markkanen, I felt like.
Yeah.
And,
I've
seen him kind of.
I got that one right.
You did. You give you that one. But sometimes it takes time. Sometimes it takes the right fit and opportunity. But it felt like the Bulls were finally in a position where they were like, hey, let's invest in the development of our young guys. And they've taken a different tack now where they've brought in these veterans. And sometimes the veterans, as we've seen with the big three, have kind of sucked the oxygen out of the room on offense. And so it's been harder for guys like Kobe and Pat to kind of find their niche. But something we've seen this season with Zach LaVine out is the development of Kobe and Pat and being able to kind of find their rhythm in with this team. And so it does give me a little bit of hope, even though the Bulls, the ceiling hasn't really changed in my eyes. Like, you don't see a future star on this roster. Once they trade Zach LaVine, it's like there's no plausible star on the roster that I can see, at least in the next season or two, unless Kobe takes another leap, or Patrick does. And you probably know long enough, having followed me, I'm a Patrick Williams enthusiast or believer. I think he gets a lot more hate than he deserves, but part of that is that fit and opportunity. So how have you seen, this is a bowl or no bowl question, I apologize, but how have you seen Kobe and Pat specifically benefit from kind of the fluctuating rotations this year with Zach LaVine out, or Drummond coming in, that kind of thing?
I think you've seen it more with Patrick than Kobe. I'll get into why. Although I do want to take a little exception with I am with you, where I was surprised that they pushed the exit button on the rebuild they inherited and started trading off Wendell and then the Lowry situation. But the 2021 season I thought was a regression for Lauri Markkanen. So I want you to expound on why you thought he was developing their ability, because that to me is exactly why he's no longer a Bull. That season crushed him. He felt like he was, being placed in the corner as a stationary 3-point shooter, that kind of stuff. So I actually thought that was a regression for Lowry that year.
I know for me, the thing was, he was a shooter that at that point hadn't really had a higher than kind of league average shooting from three.
Right.
He was, I described him as a very tall shooting guard. Right.
Yep.
His first early years, and people saw this power forward who could do all these things, whereas this is a shooting guard who struggles with rebounding, who isn't a good passer, and struggles defensively, and really hasn't been able to shoot very well. So what I think I saw from Lowry that season was his shooting finally did come around. He shot, I think, 40% that season. Right. So that was kind of the development. But I do remember early on, they had asked him, I think it was that season, and correct me if I'm wrong, they were asking him about doing pick and pops or kind of doing a 2-man game with LaVine. And Larry was kind of like, well, we were going to do that. It's to me, that was what are you talking about? You guys are the two highest level offensive players on the team. A pick and pop makes a lot of sense with you guys. And they really hadn't done it a whole lot with kind of the previous coaching staff. And so I did feel like Billy tried to have them doing more things. Now, he did do a lot more standing in the corner because of kind of the expanded roles of Kobe, for example. I think Kobe coming in really took a lot of the wind out of Lowry's kind of on-ball sails, if you will. So that's kind of what I mean is
got it.
I saw, even though his stats necessarily didn't rise that season, I saw hey, he's finally shooting the way he's supposed to. Yeah. And Billy's finally putting him in positions to kind of maximize his tallness, really, to get these shots off.
Yeah.
Now, obviously, he's blossomed into something way more in Utah, but we always wanted that from Lowry. We're like, please do these things. You see these monster dunks.
Yeah.
You have that stretch, the February stretch, and you just kind of wanted it more. But I don't know. I think there's a whole lot of things I could diagnose as problems for why that is. But I'm happy to see him flourish. Obviously.
And I was joking before because when I held up the one finger, I mean, I've gotten so many wrong over the years that I do have to celebrate my rare victories. But I was always on Lowry Island. I just saw
I could tell.
Saw an incredibly skilled 7-footer just with the right intentions. One other quick thing before I get into Patrick and Kobe, like that first season for Billy was a weird one for us because that was obviously the throes of the pandemic, and we did everything on Zoom. So whereas I had interviewed Billy once or twice before in person when he was coaching OKC, I didn't have a personal relationship with him. So everything was on Zoom. It was a weird season. And I'm not like saying woe is us. I mean, it was a flipping global pandemic, right? But it was just, we weren't as like, I didn't really have as much nuance to that season because I was watching everything on TV and doing what we're doing now is Zooming with everybody. So we weren't in the locker room. We didn't know everything that was going on. It was just obviously a weird season. But to your question about Patrick and Kobe, I've seen it more with Patrick just because for whatever reason, it really does take him to calibrate mentally that, okay, I can be aggressive. I don't know why that is with him, but he's admitted on the record that he's had trouble playing alongside 3 high usage guys, 3 more veteran status players in Vooch, Zach and DeMar. And what the organization, as you guys know, has been harping on him forever. It's like you can be aggressive and play aggressively without necessarily taking a lot of shots. You can sprint the floor in transition. You can dive cut with force. You can, grab a rebound and push it up yourself. You can, get into secondary offense with more pace. So there are so many ways you can be aggressive without taking 15, 18 shots a game. But for whatever reason, he has struggled with that. And when Zach is out, I do think you see a different mindset mentally with him. I'm with you. I think he's quietly had a pretty underrated defensive season. I think he's not a guy who's flashy. And I think especially at this point, you have to throw out the draft status, forget that he's the 4th overall pick, and forget who came behind him. You just got to look at him in a vacuum. And I think, you're seeing a starting level player there. And he is still very young. So I think he still has room to grow. Kobe, I know it's only 2 games, but the way he has played since Zach has come back, I think this is here to stay. And you saw this start to happen last season. I mean, I know his numbers were down, but everybody across the board, media, scouts, executives, coaches, saw a more complete and better Kobe White last year, even though it was his least impactful season statistically. Mm-hmm. And then you saw it in his voice and his presence in the locker room. He is a joy to cover, man. I love covering that dude. He is hilarious and gregarious and just a great team guy. That stretch where he got hot and all the attention was on him. I got the last big interview with him before he shut it down. He was not liking being the center of attention. I talked to him in Miami at that shoot around. We were down there for 2 games and we had a nice long sit down and, he just does not like talking about himself. But I think, again, it's 2 games, so we got to see it continue. But the fact that he is still kind of, to me, he's been the primary guy, especially that second Charlotte game, even with Zach back. So I think he's here to stay. And, it's early, but you said you don't see a star coming. But then you did throw in the caveat, unless he takes another jump. I mean, does that guy have all-star potential? I don't know the answer to that. I mean, it's just certainly a valid debate, whereas before you would have been laughed out of the gym.
I'm watching the Knicks, Bulls versus Knicks game, and I believe it was they caught Kobe mic'd up, and I believe they were going for a 2-for-1, or they wanted to go for a 2-for-1, and this really stood. I mean, we've talked about it. Me and Chris have talked about it on our podcast before, about how his leadership, that was one of the first things that I noticed before the numbers started to come around was how vocal he was. And it was really cool to see see him go to DeMar and was like, hey, DeMar, when you come off that exit, you got to let it go, man. We're trying to get that 2-for-1. And I'm like that says a lot. He's going to DeMar, and DeMar was like, and then again, it shows just how great of a teammate DeMar is, that, there's some vets be like, yo, who you talking to? Right. And DeMar's like, you're right. I got to know that. And I'm like, it's just really cool to see that type of growth is from Kobe. And like you said, I was worried when Zach came back, I was like, man, this guy here, like, I don't know what's gonna happen. And there were possessions, Zach runs right to the corner, and Kobe, all right, I'm gonna just do my thing. I'm gonna call it. Like, it's really cool to see that from Kobe. And I say, like, and like you said, getting, like how you said, like Bill like likes to go into the granular things when talking about ball, and that's one of the things I like to do as well. And I love listening to Billy because, like, I mean, I don't coach at the NBA level, obviously, but I do coach AAU basketball, and I'm always looking to get better. So listening to guys like Billy talk about the game always helps me. And so, you know, one of the bigger things for me is like the development part. Like, I'm a big proponent. Like, I love talking about development. And I think one of the things when Patrick came out of that draft, and if you watched a lot of his film in high school, a lot of his game was on ball. You know, talking to his, I know his high school coach and his AU coach for Team United, and he would say, like, a lot. He would be our point guard. He would be, you know, he'd bring the ball up, get us in our offense, and I think you see that stuff coming, kind of almost like in a way hurting him, because he's so used to being on the ball,
right?
That when he has to be on this role where he's, you know, floor spacer, you know, having to be able to play off the catch, like, he's processing the floor a lot slower than he does when he's on the ball. And I think it shows, like you said, like, for instance, again, right? Just the other night against Charlotte, right? DeMar has the ball in the low post, and Pat has a 45 cut right there, ready to go. And other games he'll do it, but then there are other games where, like, maybe there's a different defensive coverage that's happening or something like that. And it's like he second guesses himself or and I just that's why I asked that question about the development part, because I listened to the basketball podcast with Chris Oliver, and I've listened to, like, how Denver develops their guys. They put them in certain situations and in practice and things like that. I'm not saying that they don't do that, but that's why I always wonder what they do in practice to help with those certain things of how to read, how to get better at processing the floor as an off-ball player more so. Because I think, I'm sorry, I'm going along with it, but I think with Kobe, he's a great success story in terms of the ball handling, because the ball handling was always high and it was loose. And there are still times this year where it's loose, but it's not as much as it used to be. And I think he's a success story for, like, you know, as much as Pat gets a lot of hate, I shouldn't hate, but criticism towards his ball handling. I think if Pat, like, you're around Pat more than any of us on this show right now, so I don't know what he looks like in practice. Maybe he doesn't go at it, but I would say, without knowing, you know, what he is in terms of a practice player and things like that, like, I would look at Kobe and say, hey, look, if Pat is willing to put the work in, like, he can really take that jump in his ball handling. I mean, you know, there are other examples of that. So I just really, I don't know, I know it started with the Kobe thing and I went off on a little tangent, but, like, I just really I like where the young guys are going, and I know there's ups and downs specifically with Patrick. But, like, Casey, I just, you know, want to ask you, how do you feel, man? Like, how do you feel about the direction of this team? You know, what are you trying to?
Casey's not a fan, though, so he doesn't care about the direction. This is what he says, at least. I don't believe him, but he says, I don't care.
I can convince you very hard. Really, but I would say this, like, so I got into this business for the journalism aspect first and foremost, and obviously I love sports. I played them my whole life. I was fortunate enough to play Division III college basketball a million years ago. So basketball is my favorite, but I am in this strictly, well, especially when I was at the Tribune, I'm in this strictly for the journalism. And, you know, now that I've moved to this other role, it's similar, but it's different. But to me, it's still based on, like, relationship stuff. So fortunes of the team, wins, losses, none of that stuff matters. Yeah. I mean, obviously, you get close to certain players, closer to some players than others, and you don't like to see players like suffer or go through tough things or anything. You have a human element to it too. But as far as wins and losses, I do not care. I've always said like covering bad teams is sometimes a lot more entertaining than covering good teams, and I've covered both. So, but real quick about Kobe and Pat, like to me, they're also pretty linked because, you talk about wins and losses and if I'm a fan or not, a direction, all that stuff. I don't care about wins and losses, but my job is to explain things, and you can see like whether it's right, wrong, flawed, you agree with it, disagree with it. You can see management's philosophy. Get low maintenance, skilled veterans like DeMar and Vooch, have them age out gracefully. Have Zach LaVine, and don't forget Lonzo Ball was supposed to be part of this too, but I'm removing him from the equation.
We'll talk about him.
Originally, he was part of that. Those are the two swing pieces because they're in their mid-20s with a little bit more experience. And then you got Kobe, Patrick, Dalen, Io moving in when DeMar and Vooch age out. Again, flawed, agree, disagree, whatever. That's the philosophy. So Kobe and Pat are a lot more linked than people realize because you need a lot of development for both those guys. And real quick, one other point that also ties into the granular aspect of Billy Donovan, with Patrick. First of all, we don't watch practice. So other than what people tell me, I have no idea what Patrick's like as a practice player. I mean, I have enough people I talk to. I have a sense, but I don't see it with my own eyes. But there was a sleepy practice recently on the weekend where there was no cameras, including our station. It was just me and Will Gottlieb, who does fantastic work for Chicago Sports.
We love Will. Yeah,
he's phenomenal. And it was just me, him, and Billy, and we talked to him and Io about how you progress in reading and attacking closeouts. Man, I would have. I think it was a travel day. I think they had to fly somewhere. If PR had not stopped him, Billy would still be talking about it right now. He was so excited to talk about how you get. But again, you can talk about player development all day long. A lot of it, at the end of the day, comes down to the player. Not only his talent level, but his instincts, his basketball IQ, his film study. And then Io, man, and Will wrote it up. I never wrote it for our site because our site's a little bit different. Will's a little more granular, more X's and O's based. Go find that story Will wrote about Io reading, elucidating how he's learned to try to get better at attacking closeouts and how it's so much different from the college level to the NBA level because of speed, length, shot clock, the ability to close out, with force and with length more quickly than you realize. It's fascinating stuff. But in Patrick's case, like I've seen more growth from Io and Kobe in those departments than Pat. I have seen growth in Pat, but maybe not to the level as those other guys. And is that a player development thing? Is that a player thing? It's probably a shared equation situation, but it's interesting to talk about it, nothing else.
Yeah, Larry and I have tons and tons of thoughts on Patrick Williams, and I could talk about Pat and Kobe as long as Billy could talk about the art of the closeout. But I think that a couple of things with it, where as Larry mentioned, he was definitely more of an on-ball player coming up, and he's a guy who, at least that I've seen so far, he takes a little bit of time to rev up.
Yeah,
he takes a little time. So his first year, he was soaking up stuff, and he was not good. He was not a good basketball player. Like he came out as a project. He was raw. He had a bunch of different skills. He had the NBA body, but he was not ready to be a high quality NBA player. But you saw this, and then he missed almost all of his second year, as with the Mitchell Robinson clothesline that broke his wrist, which is just a brutal thing for him after having like that COVID riddled first season. And so, but you saw him that third season, they said, hey, you're going to take threes and you're going to defend. And he actually got really good at both of those. Now his release is still a little slow and stuff, but he shot 41% from three, and he's a career 41% shooter from three. And he was statistically one of the best isolation defender in the league his third year. But it's that points per game. And if you go just look at Basketball Reference, it's like 9.8, 9.9, like it looks the same every year. And so his, as you said, his development defensively has kind of been understated because he has the monster block sometimes, but it's a lot of it is fundamentally he's just gotten better and the processing has gotten better. And I think for Patrick, and I'll ask a question at the end of this because I think it's relevant to this. He did miss some time. It is kind of his third year of in games. And then also his role has kind of fluctuated between this first year and the third and fourth year. But that process, I think, as he's gotten more opportunity, and we've seen it this year with the rebounding, with making the cuts, with his ball handling, he started slow. He's not shooting well. He was, you were killing him early in the season for rebounding, and I was killing you for killing him about rebounding. Probably one of the, I'm probably one of the few comments that you read on Twitter, hopefully, but we've seen, I think, with time. But the problem is, at the end of this year, he's a restricted free agent, and they weren't able to reach an extension. And so my question is, and you can expound on this if you want to talk about Pat more, is are the Bulls going to match any offer that Patrick Williams receives in restricted free agency this offseason? Or are they going to trade him at the deadline? Because I know you reported earlier in the season that his future could be in question, I think is how you worded it, based on kind of his poor play to start the year. So just curious if you want to talk about kind of that aspect of it, where he's clearly developing slowly, but he's developing, but also time is running out in a sense on this contract.
So it wasn't even phrased the Bull or no Bull, but I was.
Well, you can say I can say
you threw the
Bulls
word
will match.
Yeah, well, you also threw the word. I was going to say no Bull emphatically, except for when you threw the word any offer in there, because if someone was something ridiculous, outlandish, but since it wasn't phrased the Bull or no Bull, I think we're more in agreement than disagreement. I completely agree with you. The Lauri Markkanen situation it's not a great comp, but it's got some value to it. You cannot give up on Patrick Williams in this stage. You just can't, for the reasons you elucidated them very well, because it's been a really weird start to his career with COVID the first year, no summer league, then obviously losing all the time the second year. He's playing with more high usage players. He's kind of had a slow learning. He only had 1 year of college, blah, blah, blah. If he's already mastered a 40% three-point shooter and a starting level defender, you've won here in some ways. Now, is he played up to the level of a number 4 pick? I said earlier in this podcast, at this point, to me, you got to throw that out. It is what it is. He's on your team. If he continues growing, and I think he has grown in playing with more force, cutting with more purpose, attacking and reading closeouts. I said he wasn't at the level of Io and Kobe, but I think he's still shown growth in those departments. So if you've mastered 40% three-point shooting and you're a starting level defender against the best opponent's best player, or second best player, depending on what Caruso's doing, it's way too early to give up on. So I fully expect Patrick, and I know I wrote that earlier in the year. I think I was more trying to convey that with his slow start and the team's slow start, like, there were no sacred cows. Like, I got the impression from talking to, people that I talked to around the league, like the Bulls, if things were going to continue, would be likely open for business. Well, they haven't continued. They've started to win. And, it's not like it's victory parades or championship or anything like that, but
rent out Grant Park. It's coming,
But I mean, like, they're starting to play better. This is now what the management kind of expected going this year. Competitiveness in every game, that kind of stuff. So I think it'd be a mistake to get rid of him, and I think he will be back.
That's good to hear. I know the fourth overall pick thing, I think, as you said, there's usually a combination of factors. And then I'll let Larro ask his next question. But the Bulls picked him fourth, but they did not treat him as a fourth overall pick in many respects, partly because of the situation. With the COVID and missing the second year, but also they brought in these guys that, usually a fourth overall pick gets a lot of latitude on offense to kind of, do a lot of on-ball reps. And you made the Lowry comparison.
Exactly. Yeah.
Right. You're on a bad team. Like, who else is doing this? With Lowry for all the miscues, maybe with the coaching, which we won't have to get into, and maybe the development aspect, Lowry got a lot of opportunity with the ball in his hands. I mean, his usage was always over 20%. He's 25%, I think, his third year, which is statistically, I think it was his best year. He got a lot of opportunity. Now, Patrick's usage rate has never raised more than 15%. He's very rarely touching the ball. And so, if you wanted to have him be a fourth overall pick, they certainly haven't treated him like one. They've treated him like a role player, and he's developing pretty well as a role player, as you mentioned. He's, 3-and-D guys like that are only 20 years old, they get paid. See DeAndre Hunter, see OG Anunoby, like those guys, Mikal Bridges, those guys get paid. But obviously, I think there's been a lot of factors that go into it, and ultimately, it's going to come down to Pat because he can't control anything else but what he can control. But I still have high hopes for Patrick that he can be at minimum a high level starter on a good team, and I think it behooves the Bulls to bring him back at any reasonable price. We'll see, if the Pistons just decide to go nuts or something, because they also wanted him in that draft, if you recall.
Yeah.
But yeah, I still have high hopes for Pat, and the team started winning, and I put this out a few weeks ago. Kobe and Pat have been the main drivers of the Bulls turnaround. They have been, from a plus minus standpoint, cleaning the glass has put them. They were the top two guys, in plus minus on the team over this stretch for the season. So that's what you want to see if you're going to do this management strategy where you kind of got this stratosphere of veterans and middling players and young players. You really want those young guys taking those reins and being the drivers of winning. That's how you attract free agents. That's how you stay competitive, right? If DeMar and Vooch leave and it's nobody, like your strategy is going to fail pretty quickly.
Yeah. I thought it was. I mean, even last, against Charlotte, I thought. I don't know how you felt about it, KC, in terms of Patrick's game against Charlotte. But I thought down the stretch in that fourth quarter, I thought him being on the floor could have helped them a lot in terms of kind of helping corral Terry a little bit, especially in actions where they tried to run Caruso off a lot of double drags to get Terry his matchup so he can attack Vooch and weaker defenders. And I just thought it's a give and take, though. You know what I mean? Like, I understand what Billy's doing. Like, you're obviously trying to get Zach and Vooch back in the rhythm, and those are your three stars. You want to get them back in. But like, I don't think that game should have went in overtime. I think if you have Patrick on the floor with Caruso, there's nowhere Terry can run to. And there was a lot of, before Pat got subbed out, there was a lot of situations where Pat ended up on him, and Pat did a good job of keeping him in front, and he moved the ball to Miles Bridges or something like that. But anyway, I guess I don't really have like a no bull question for you. My question for you is like, how fun was it to cover like Pau Gasol? Like, because when Vucevic first came to the Bulls when he was traded here, I thought it was so cool because, I feel like when Vooch has got it going, from either side of the block, when he's gotten it going from three a little bit, passing, like I sometimes catch myself like, I wish we could have got like a younger Pau Gasol, you know what I mean? Because it was cool to see him play at his age he was, but like for you, like how fun was it to cover Pau?
I like covering Pau for multiple reasons, because the biggest thing is I'm attracted to people that you can talk to about things other than basketball. That's one reason I always love covering Joakim Noah so much, because you can talk to him about a wide variety of things. And Pau was so cultured and so worldly and so interested in the world. I mean, he was into a lot of philanthropic stuff and big reader. I'm a big reader. We used to talk about books we'd read and things like that. I actually have a crazy Pau story in the sense that one of the greatest assignments in journalism history was in 2014 when Derek missed that second year, 13-14, with the meniscus tear. He played the first 10 games, then tore the meniscus in Portland. So he was out all that year, and he was on the World Cup team. And so since he hadn't played all year, the Tribune sent me to Spain for 2 weeks to cover.
That's tough.
Yeah, it was rough. Barcelona, Madrid. And I wasn't even really covering the team. I mean, I was covering Derrick Rose. So like the beat was really easy. I had to write about one person. Now Tom Thibodeau was an assistant on that team. Anthony Davis was on that team, so I did a Chicago-related Anthony Davis feature. Coincidentally, that's actually where I first met Arturas Karnisovas, because he was a consultant for that team, and Tom Thibodeau actually introduced me to Arturas in Spain. So there's a crazy connection. But long-winded way of saying, the Bulls had signed Pau that summer. he had yet to play for the Bulls, but I'm in Spain and I'm in Madrid, and I knew he grew up outside of Madrid. So I got on, like, I figured out like where he's from. I didn't have any connections. I don't speak Spanish very well, but I can understand a decent amount. And obviously there's Google Translate. I got on a bus, 45-minute public transportation, and went outside Madrid, found his elementary school, found his first coach, and spent the day with him, and did like this backstory on Pau's like upbringing. So like when I first met Pau, I'm like, yeah, I was in your hometown. He's like, what? he was like crazy. No, but he was fantastic to cover. Win or lose, was always there. And like I said, just I've always gravitated towards the players that you can talk about things beyond basketball, and he was certainly one of those guys.
That's kind of cool. That's cool.
That's great. In case I know we're at the hour mark here, but I wanted to ask you just a couple questions. And we've already touched on these things a bit, but this, the statement I have here is the Bulls' goal is not to win a championship, but rather to stay competitive, or quote unquote competitive. Is that bull or no bull? That's a tough one.
I would say, what was it? It was the goal is not to win a championship, but to stay competitive. Yes. That's bull. Yeah. I mean, look, the Reinsdorf theory is well documented. I've talked to Michael on the record about it. I've written it a million times. You could say real teams go into the luxury tax regardless, and that's how they get competitive. That's not how the Reinsdorfs do business. So there is that parameter placed on this situation. They're only going to go into the luxury tax if they feel like they've got a championship contender. But in terms of their commitment, their financial commitment to the team and the infrastructure, and look, this is a franchise that won 6 championships, and I've seen Michael, take the lead from his father, and I know how competitive he is. I've known Michael a long time. He wants to see this franchise win another championship. I mean, what they're doing this week, we're taping this the week of the Ring of Honor, to celebrate the past. I mean, that he's doing that because he remembers how competitive they were and how much he misses those days, So, and Arturas and Mark have said it on the record as well. No one gets in this business to not try to win championships. I mean, they're a long way from it. I mean, I'm not going to sugarcoat that. They're in a tough spot. They are right in the middle, mediocrity, and that's not a good place to be. So I'm not going to sugarcoat that, but they are competitive and they do want to win a championship.
I think I agree with you that they would like to. It's always what are you doing to achieve that goal that I have a lot of issues with, certainly with some of their roster decisions and the luxury tax thing, I think gets a lot more play than it should. Like, obviously, you've stated multiple times on the record that management will pay, that they have carte blanche to pay the tax if it's a team that they think can win. Now, obviously, the question is whether they've put themselves in a position not to pay the tax, for that reason, or if they're just, taking a different step here. But I think the fans always want that hope. I know, one of my statements here, we already kind of talked about, as I said, my statement is Casey Johnson feels nothing when he watches basketball, bull or no bull, right? Because you're talking about how you're not a fan. But I think just in general, right? If you're watching a team, you want them to succeed. You want them to, because those storylines as a journalist, I'm sure are more exciting when you don't have to watch people struggle, but sometimes the struggle is helpful. Right.
Yeah, I disagree with that. And I don't mean to cut you off too, but I'll expound on that. I'm telling you, I don't think, unless you're in this business as especially like a newspaper journalist, which I was for 30 years, I don't think people can understand it. But it trust me, I mean, like those of us in the business, there's the old adage, like no cheering in the press box. We do not care. We are there to report the facts, report a story, describe what happened, explain it, get into relationships, context, all that good stuff. I'm telling you right now, like those years I covered the Tim Floyd teams were some of the most enjoyable seasons I've ever had, because they're like just rife with stories after stories after stories after color for personality. We had Ron Artest one time describe us to us why he was so good on defense was because he was a great shoplifter as a kid, and he went into an elaborate discussion about his shoplifting routine in the hood in New York City. I mean, come on, man. It's like you're like dying for that as a journalist. That's way more exciting than writing about like Judd Bushler scored 8 points off the bench in an NBA Finals game. Okay, so I've covered them all. I've covered great teams. That's really fun. I've covered really bad teams. That's really fun. The job is fun because you're around the best athletes in the world who give us their time and their stories and their respect. I mean, that's the fun part. Okay. I mean, are there some nights where it's drudgery? Of course. Are there some nights where it's boring basketball? I mean, the 5-14 start was offensive if you're a basketball fan. That was bad basketball, really bad basketball. Okay. So yes, there are things I feel. But in terms of whether they win or lose, I do not care. I really don't.
And to be fair, I was just trying to make it lighthearted. You know,
I wanted to have a little fun with that and be a little more emphatic on even more. But one more thing about the championship stuff that I was going to say. You said we're going to get into Lonzo Ball, and I will say this. And that ship has sailed, and I'm not like throwing this out for Bulls fans to have hope or all that stuff or say, oh, well, look, the plan was working. But I will say this, if Lonzo Ball stays healthy and they stay on that trajectory, they are a tax team, undeniably a tax team moving forward, because they would have been in championship contention. They would have kept making the ads around that, and so that's just the way it is. And I'm not, again, making apologies or defending. I mean, the facts are the facts. They paid the luxury tax once in franchise history, and they traded out of it on purpose when the year Derek went down with the meniscus and sent Lou all to Cleveland. So those are the facts. But, I would just say if Lonzo was still healthy and the Bulls were on the trajectory they were on, I certainly think this would be a tax team right now.
And you could see the vision that year, and it was some of the most fun that I've had watching basketball.
That was good basketball.
A Bulls fan. It was good basketball. It was just fun. It was exciting. And so the question I want to ask you is because I know you have sources. Sometimes Larro and I have sources. Sometimes, but there's been very little about Lonzo Ball this season, and now I know that they've officially ruled him out for the rest of the season, or that's kind of the expectation, but we've heard some optimism about whether or not Lonzo, either in his own mind or in his trainer's minds, see some potential path to playing professional basketball this year. So, will Lonzo Ball play any professional basketball this season, bowl or no bowl? Like, that's, to me, is like, I'm excited about it, but I want to hear what you say.
I'll just say this. I'm not being disrespectful to the question. We've had some fun with the bowl, no bowl. I refuse to go there for two reasons on this subject. Number one, out of the humane element, because I have no idea, and I've long given up the futile exercise of trying to guess injuries or people's bodies, and I am now literally looking at him like having like quality of life the rest of his life. And I don't mean like be over dramatic about this or whatever, but when he talked to us on that Zoom that one time and talked about how he was having pain going up flights of stairs, man, that just put it all in perspective for me. To me, this is not about basketball anymore. This is about this dude having quality of life the rest of the year. And I know it's important to the Bulls' future and the Bulls' salary cap and luxury tax and all that stuff, and whether he's going to be disabled player or come back. I understand all that. I'm not going to make a prediction on Lonzo Ball. I just hope he salvages whatever he can salvage, NBA career, life, what have you. I can just tell you this. I barely got to know the dude. He was as joyful of a player to be around as I've covered, because he did not care about his stat line at all. It was about making those around him better. The ultimate connecting piece. You could see the joy they were playing with that first half of the season. I miss watching him play basketball. I'm sure you guys too. He was a joyful basketball player to watch play. So I know it's important, but I'm kind of letting that story just play out via natural consequences. However it plays out, I'll write about it, but I'm not going to get into predictions or guesses because I have no idea. I just know it's a tough road back, man. I mean, dude had a ligament replacement. Man. I
don't think anyone's even done that, right? Yeah. I don't think it's kind of unprecedented. It's it's new territory, I think, for these NBA athletes. So yeah. Obviously, I echo your sentiments that
Yeah, I know.
But we would love to see him back playing basketball, but just to have, it sounded like there was some reports that the issues that he was playing with, maybe the feeling pain going upstairs, hopefully have been resolved or something to that effect. I hope that's
the context that got lost because Twitter is not a great conveyor of information.
No.
Billy Donovan made this clear. The pain is gone in terms of what he is doing now. He's not running on a basketball court. He's not cutting on a basketball court. And I hope that continues through those activities. But when the headline became Lonzo Ball's pain-free. Well, he's pain-free doing what he's doing now. He's not pain-free playing an NBA basketball game. And like I said, I hope he is pain-free playing an NBA basketball game because he deserves it. But that needs to be emphasized. We don't know what the future holds for him.
It's amazing how far we've come in terms of like injuries, because I remember when Derek had said, remember that quote about, I want to be able to, play with my kids and not have any knee pain, stuff like that.
Congratulations.
That was like, really? He said this? Like, what are you talking? You're being paid this amount of money, whatever. And
by the way, the criticism was ridiculous at the time. That was completely fair statement coming from his heart. He absolutely should not have gotten criticized for that. Just to be clear.
Thank you. What he said.
Yeah, yeah, man, you can't. I'm right there with you with both you guys with Rose, man. I mean, I'm from Chicago, and I grew up watching them play ball in high school, small fry. So like, it's different, with Derek. So no, I'm right there with you guys. I just felt like he got a lot of criticism. That was just.
But you're right, Larry. I think we've come a long way in the conversation, and Derek took a leading role in that with those comments, I think, and it became fairer to say, this is my life is more important than my job.
Funny that you say that, because there's two separate things, but you're spot on about both of them. The meetings and graduations was separate from him getting crucified over not playing for a year, which is now kind of the norm. Like if you tear an ACL, you're kind of out a year. He was getting killed for that. I always say, though, and I've said this to Derek to his face, like he did contribute a little bit to that in terms of appearing in a ad campaign called The Return. So there is that. But that was a shoe company, and they were paying him a lot of money. So I get
that's true. He had a few million reasons to do that.
Yeah. But Derek was ahead of his time in both those things. And this is what I love about Derek now in this stage of his career. Like, he is becoming kind of like this sage old guy, like, because he's so comfortable in his own skin, and he always was. It just sometimes wasn't delivered in the right way. But those of us who were around him and knew what he was about and knew who he was at his core, we got that stuff, which is why we defended him back then. Because, like, man, I'm telling you, all the stories I've covered, all the years I've been doing this, the portion of Chicago that turned on Derek, that's one thing I never understood and was so wrong, in my opinion. Man, oh man. And I think it's course corrected. I think enough people have realized, Derek was kind of right, number one, and number two, that's our dude, but like, man, he should not have been crucified or judged in the way he was, in my opinion.
You're not going to hear any disagreement from us, I don't think, on that.
No,
one, so.
Not at all. Not at all.
And I think, to kind of wrap this up, you play such an important role for us as fans, because I think media, you're a more traditional journalist right now. You said your role has changed a little bit with NBC Sports Chicago, but you're seeing, like, for example, you mentioned Will Gottlieb at CHGO, the kind of the amalgamation of fandom and journalism is becoming more prominent, obviously, with the internet and Twitter and things like that, and the access to players being a lot more widespread than it used to be. But and that's why we introduced you as the gold standard, right, of Bulls journalism. And you do feel such an important role of trying to be objective, coming out with these stories to really humanize these players, because we get sometimes so caught up in the wins and the losses or the stat sheet that we lose sight of who these are. These are people. These are their jobs. Their jobs just happen to be televised, and they're paid for it, obviously. But I think fandom is in a much better place because of the work that you do as a journalist, and obviously we hope that continues. And we always, we've talked to each other on Twitter, and you're like, "Hey, read the article." I'm like, "Hey, I read every article. I promise. I click on the article. I'm trying to do my part." But we really do appreciate, the work that you do for NBC Sports Chicago and for the Bulls as a fandom. And we do. I know you get some flack that you mostly avoid for good reasons. Just avoid it. Continue to avoid it. But we do really appreciate you, and And I just hope you know how much we do as fans appreciate the work that you're doing for the Bulls.
Well, that's incredibly kind of you. Number one, I will say a couple of things. First of all, I think the beat is in as good a shape as it's ever been. I mean, there's been a lot of talented people over the years, but as right now, I mean, you've got so many different talented people covering this team with different skill sets and different strengths. I mean, and you can go across the board, whether it's Will that I already mentioned, or Darnell, or Julia, Joe Cowley, Cody Westerland from 670 Score, Sam Smith, the Ledge. I mean, it's covered from a lot of different angles. And then to your point, like the business has changed so much that, like, you know, people like yourselves, I mean, you guys are very smart, informed chroniclers of the team too. I mean, and I would just say, for what you said about me, first of all, that was very kind and I appreciate it. First of all, the only flack I pay attention to is the flack I get in my own house, because I get plenty of teenage boys and,
and
a wife. So I got plenty of flack there. That's all I need in my life. That's all the flack I need in my life. But I will say, like, I've had to change a lot through the years. I mean, and I definitely come to this way more as an objective journalist. And I've seen the business change in my 34 years in the business, not all that time covering the Bulls, but a lot of it covering the Bulls. And I'm appreciative of you know, if you want to stay employed, you got to change with the times. It has taken me a while I definitely show more of my personality and more of my my opinions than I used to. And it took me a while to get comfortable with that. I'm still not great at it at times. And I can always default into the humble, objective journalist mode, because that's really at my core what I got in the business for. But that's kind of passé and out the window now in large part. So I love the opportunity. I've got an NBC Sports Chicago. It's pushed me in areas that I was not expecting to be pushed, and it was the right change and challenge for me at this stage of my career. And I look, at the end of the day, we're all sitting here talking about humans and about the NBA, and that's a good place to be. So thank you very much for your kind words. I appreciate them, and I feel very fortunate to have been doing what I've been doing for as long as I've been doing it. I don't ever take that lightly or for granted.
Yeah, I mean, I agree with everything Kris has said. I mean, honestly, I started this pod off and I couldn't even look at the screen. I'm looking at KC right now, you know. But no, man, like Kris is amazing, man, for setting this up, and I'm so happy that you came on, because this was really cool to really ask you some questions and get your thoughts, you know, on this team. So, like I said, everything Kris said, I agree with totally, man. Appreciate you.
Thank you. Appreciate it.
Well, Casey, I know this is probably pointless because everyone knows where you work and what you do. But if you want to tell anyone who's listening that maybe don't follow the Bulls, because you do have people that are kind of across the NBA spectrum, where can people find your work, and do you have anything in the works this season that you want us to look forward to?
Well, so as I said, we're taping this the week of the Ring of Honor, which is going to be a really cool event for the Bulls. So I will have some coverage on the Ring of Honor at NBCSportsChicago.com. That's where you can find my written work. If you watch the games, I have a small on-air role with our awesome broadcast team of Adam Amin and Stacey King, and our producer Mark Brady and director Russ Leonard, and many Tamara Anderson, many other wonderful behind-the-scenes people. And then that infernal thing called Twitter/X. I'm at KCJ Hoop, and I'm not on the gram, as the kids like to say, so I don't even know what that is.
You're not missing anything.
Yeah, I don't do much beyond Twitter, so there you go.
Well, awesome. Thank you guys so much for listening to this episode. Please follow Casey's work. Amazing journalist and just a good person, and always very kind and gracious with his time. So appreciate you guys listening to us for another week. We'll see you guys next week. Trade deadline is coming pretty soon. A lot of teams can start trading players on January 15th. That's coming up soon. So if we're going to get some Zach LaVine or any other news, we'll get it soon. So we'll be there to cover it. Thank you guys once again for listening to Swish Theory, and we'll see you guys next week. Peace.